Okay, hello everybody to our meetup um, about GPT-3 and AI as creative solution. Um, in this case, I don't want um, to deep to dive deep into the technology because for my interest, it's about art and cultural and creative approach. So let me introduce me. My name is Vlad Alexeev. Some people know me as Mertzmensch online, um, and I am working for DB Schenker in digital department. We are driving the digital transformation, um, but also I'm very passionate about AI, and I am since last summer, no, since last autumn, um, one part of small group of OpenAI GPT-3 ambassadors. Um, we are about to provide help and support to the GPT-3 community within OpenAI and to write articles, to make workshops, to make open calls as well. So in case you are interested for some specific topics, in my case, it would be creative writing, prompt design, or art and media um, information and use of GPT-3. Feel free to contact me. Um, Now, I want to tell you about GPT-3, about my personal journey within GPT-3. Um, and so, um, but first, I want to quote my favorite. It's my favorite quote of a favorite of a famous MIT researcher, AI expert Nate Silver, who wrote, "AI is still an incredible complex problem. Right now, we have no technology that we can actually use to control an entity that hasn't been programmed to behave the way we say it should." In other words, AI becomes autonomous. It becomes its own personality, so to say. Of course, it's not a personality, but we see in in very interesting ways how um, the un, unobserved AI can develop wonderful wonderful things. So you can probably remember um, in the year 2019, GPT-2 was published by OpenAI and suddenly depublished because they had some issues, not issues, but they feared they were afraid about misuse of GPT-2 because GPT-2 was a language model, a natural language processing model based on machine learning, um, which could write not only sentences or not only some text sequences, but really big texts. And the texts were very good. So they couldn't be detected as AI written contents. But later they published more and bigger models because they've seen that GPT-2 is not so able to be not so capable of fake news or of hate speech and so on. That's why they published it for everybody to try it and to research and to use in their art projects and so on. So what is GPT? What is GPT itself? It is generative pre-trained transformer. It's an autoregressive language model, which is pretty which is pretty interesting in how it's work. It's based on transformer. Transformer is a network, a neural network, which has the approach of self-attention. With other words, the text which is generated by GPT pays attention to the prompt which you have input previously, pays attention to the texts it generates itself, and for the future as well. That's why the texts are coherent, they have inner logic, and they have not such random, chaotic character compared to another NLP's approaches previously. And yes, the prompts can be stylistical and semantical coherent. That's why the texts you get with GPT-2 as well, you've got with GPT-2, were really amazing. Like, for example, this was one of the examples of the GPT-2 by OpenAI. The prompt was consisted of from two statements. The first statement was recycling is good for the world, and the second part of this prompt was no, you could not be more wrong. So this was the prompt. The completion, the model completion, wrote very funny, but in some kinds eerie text with argumentation about why recycling is not good for the world. So it took the position of the second part of the sequence, like dementation of or rejection of the statement before. And if you can see here, of course, if you read this GPT-2 driven text, you can see this is very strange argumentation, but of course the logic is here. So, and the this rhetoric power is still here. So like recycling is not good for the world, it's bad for environment, it's bad for our health, it's bad for our economy. I'm not kidding. So in this case, GPT-2 took some personal statement or some personal pose. That's why this brought my attention to GPT-2, because I was always on my search for creative use of AI. And previously, I worked with visual AI, like AI models like Big GAN, Style GAN, Style Transfer, and so on. But in this case, I found the texts were pretty interesting, and I wanted to find out how the AI may recept and interpret our world. That's why I just continued experimenting. So for the first, so for GPT-2, there are many approaches to use it right now as well. For example, this is my favorite JavaScript-based Colab notebook. So I can share it later, or probably Craig can share my presentation later as well. It's okay, of course, and you can just try it out, because within this notebook, this Colab notebook, you can use GPT-2 in its full power, but it takes some time to generate or to complete the text. So I tried, of course, with various other approaches using GPT-2. For example, you could fine-tune GPT-2. So you could train GPT-2 on your own text corpus. And in my case, I tried in various languages. So in this case, I tried in English, in Alice in Wonderland. In Russian, I tried with some poetry of Pushkin in Russian. In German, I tried with Goethe, Faust. But as I've seen, the English texts were still very good. Of course, in this case, you can see this Soup song from Alice, not in Wonderland, but in the second book. But Russian and German texts were still very well. They had flows linguistic flaws, grammatic flaws. So they looked for the first like legit language, but if you read this text, you can see it's pretty messed. It's not really good for use. So GPT-2 was mainly good for use with English texts. But nevertheless, GPT-2 was a huge milestone in NLP because it can generate unsupervised texts with different styles, different approaches, different topics, and you can really make many interesting approaches with or experiments with GPT-2. So, like if you remember this quote by Nate Silver, of course. So probably you can already feel the vibe because of course this text was generated by GPT-2. So Nate Silver is a non-existing AI expert which was generated by GPT-2. In my experiment, I just wrote artificial intelligence bears certain dangers, said the AI expert. So this was my prompt, and the rest of the text was written by GPT-2. Nate Silver, AI is still an incredibly complex problem, and so on and so on. That's why you can see here this meta perspective. And by the way, this face is not a portrait of somebody, but I generated it using ArtBreeder. So so indeed, just to compare with the power of AI, I use my own face to mix it to this face or portrait of Ned Silver. But it's another story because today I will tell you about GPT-2 or GPT-3, of course, because the most interesting completion by GPT-2 for me was the answer about meaning of life. I think if you tried NLP, you had probably some ideas just to ask AI about meaning of life. It's interesting how what it will say. And in my completion, in my case, so I did it in this case with Talk to Transformer. It was a web application implemented GPT-2. The answer was really, really interesting because so this is the meaning of life. So like the meaning of it is subjective and varies from person to person, will or different. It has never been given a clear definition either by man or anything else. The most we can do is make jokes about it. So I found this completion by AI about meaning of life very, very well wisely told and very enlightened. So I suppose many people wouldn't make this statement about meaning of life. That was some kind of mind-blowing for me. The uses by GPT-2 or by NLP itself can be approached, of course, for various areas of industry, of culture, and so on. For example, in culture, you know this book Wander Road by Ross Goodwin. He is an artist and writer and very interesting person in creative AI. He generated a whole book using well his own NLP. It was not GPT-2, but it was really good to see what is possible with it. Sunspring was generated by his approach as well. Of course, there were some fake news dangers or misuse of GPT-2, but with GPT-2 it was not observed. So people hadn't misused GPT-2 in big way. So I haven't. I'm not aware of such cases. If you are aware, you can tell me, please. But regarding GPT-2, it was not discovered by some misusers. What have I done with GPT-2? I've done, for example, some short movies. I let GPT-2 write for me screenplays and and I have made the visuals after these screenplays and let it and made short movies from it. I don't know, probably after the session I can show some of the movies because they are very short, 2 or 3 minutes. Um, because so I will just continue. If you have some questions, you can of course ask me. In another case, for example, I did it was Bloomsday in the last year, and you know, Bloomsday is a day of celebrating James Joyce Ulysses, and um, um, people are going across Dublin and so visiting the places described in Ulysses, and I did it in my way. I fed GPT-2, I trained GPT-2 on the complete Ulysses and let GPT-2 rewrite Ulysses. And I took some of the parts of this completion and made a short movie as well. Interestingly, of course, James Joyce is, as a writer, very interesting and very experimental. That's why some of the flaws of GPT-2 were kind of hidden by the power of avant-garde. And I found it very interesting because AI and avant-garde are very, they have connections because now AI is about to reshape the whole cultural world as well, like the historical avant-gardists, Dadaists, Surrealists, Expressionists in the 1920s reshaped the culture of the old time. Now in the 2020s, AI is about to reshape our culture. So it was GPT-2 trained on 40 gigabyte texts on 8 million pages and working with 1.5 billion parameters. Last year, OpenAI published GPT-3, and it was trained on 570 gigabytes text. I don't know how many pages and how many articles. It's there are some statistics, but they are, so you can look it up in GitHub. And working with 175 million parameters. Of course, numbers regarding NLP are of course relevant, but not the most relevant. This is why I was always like skeptical about NLP research, where people are showing the better performance, the more effective statistics and graphs of their NLP models, because of course for researchers it's very relevant, I know, but for me I wanted to see text, because NLP should provide me new worlds, new texts, and numbers of the statistics were for me not relevant because I am not an AI researcher. I am rather AI creative researcher. That's why I applied last year in the summer. No, in May. I applied in May for GPT-3, and I've got no responses. And seeing how new experiments popped up everywhere, I applied again and again, and then I wrote directly to Greg Brockman, asking him to the access, because I wanted to experiment in the literary way. I wanted to write about it in my blog, and I wanted to make movies. So I wanted to use it not in I mean, not as in some semi-scientific way. So like exploring and creating. And then I've got the access in this June, I think. And since June, I became very active using GPT-3 in various approaches. That's why I'm kind of ambassador right now. And by the way, in the next meetup, you will see another ambassador. Is very cool. So it's really I'm very grateful for you for inviting me here and for inviting us. So I don't know. Probably you have already GPT-3 access. If not, this is how the playground looks like or looked like. They changed the design meanwhile. You can see here, you can just enter your text. You can enter prompt. Of course, here are some settings hidden in my screenshot. But the fascinating thing about GPT-3 for me was you haven't to define the language. You haven't to define some specific of the texts. You have to live within the text. You have to design the prompts. If you want to generate or to get some completion, you have to prepare the prompts thinking like GPT-3. And this is, I think, very important about design or about prompt design. You have to think not like a human, but like a GPT-3. If you want to get some result, you cannot just ask GPT-3 for this. Of course, right now using instruct model, it's easier to get it, but in the next I want to present you some of my experiments. So what some of my discoveries regarding GPT-3. If you have some questions, you can ask. Do I have time?
I definitely have time, Vlad. Thank you for that. That was a really good background and context, I think. I know Michael and myself have access to GPT-3. Who else in the room? And I know we've got a few new additions. Does anybody else in the room have access to it currently? And if not, what questions do you have for Vlad?
In case you have no questions, I can continue with GPT-3.
Go for it, Vlad.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So here are some of my discoveries regarding GPT-3. It can write perfectly in various languages. So in case of German, for example, according statistics, German is in the top 10 data set corpus. Like the GPT-3 is trained on a huge amount of English texts. It's number one, and the second language within the text is most frequent. The most frequent language is German. But also, so in German, it can generate great texts with great stylistic literary texts. It can mimic old Goethe letters, for example. It's really fascinating. In kind of Russian, it's not so. It's still not so powerful, but indeed it's powerful. Especially regarding the older texts. So I assume within the dataset there are more older classical Russian literature like Pushkin or Dostoevsky and so on. That's why if you want to generate some literary texts, you will get the older style, which is pretty perfect. But if you want to generate some modern Russian texts, it has some flaws. But as far as I know, OpenAI are working on multilingual support and on more multilingual possibilities for GPT-3. Regarding Japanese as well, it was perfect. It was very interesting and very absurd. And I rewrote, for example, the version of a pillow book by Sei Shonagon. I will publish it later one day. So multilingual is GPT-3 perfect. It can also write the poems. So for example, I asked GPT-3 to write a poem by Shakespeare. This was my prompt. Here is a poem by Shakespeare. The rest was written by GPT-3. So you can see here springs, things, brass, arms, fields, flies, dice. The rhymes are here. It's jambic verse, like in his sonnets. So I sing for food in spite of sounding breath. It's pretty perfect old English style, but here you have to be cautious. What I haven't discovered initially, the first two lines are borrowed directly from a poem by Alexander Pope. Yes, and so it's not just some intertextual reference, but it's really word for word quotes by this poem. The rest is written by GPT-3. And this is where you have to be cautious sometimes. If you generate some texts by GPT-3, and if you want to make or to be them original, especially in the literary way, you always have to back check them. Because in some case, it can be that within the new generated unique text corpus, you will get some quotations which are really one-to-one directly transferred from another texts, and just in case to prevent some claims of plagiarism or something like this. But OpenAI is aware of this topic, and they are also working on on looking how to prevent such cases of quotation.
Now, Vlad, if I can just interrupt for a moment, I've noticed the same thing, and the general rule I've found is that if you're trying to generate very short pieces, particularly of very common statements, often there's only a few ways to write them. And so GPT-3 tends to return completions that are very similar to real statements, but the longer and more complex the piece, the harder it gets. We do have a question from Samir about using GPT-3 for speech to text.
Yes.
Do you could you comment on that?
Yes, of course. Speech to, do you want to generate, so speech to which use case do you want to know in this case? Because of course, for example, text to speech is of course possible, and I'm doing it for my short movies, for example. But speech to text, how do you want to apply GPT-3 in this case?
Yeah, well, I think GPT-3 doesn't really do speech in quite the way. So you might have to have something capture the speech and convert it in a way for GPT-3 to understand it. But I did see this morning that example that someone created. It's in the Slack group again, where they created several independently intelligent agents in a virtual world who you could converse with via speech. And they used a couple of other systems to do the conversions. I'll find that and share a link. Samir, you might find it interesting.
That's interesting. Of course, thank you. Because of course you can combine various GPT-2 instances running parallelly, for example, and convert them into speech and make some kind of dialogue. Of course, you can do a dialogue within one session, within one GPT-3 session, and I'm doing often. So I'm doing often for my movies, for example, or for some texts or scenes. But of course, if you want to convert speech to text, you need some machine learning approaches. There are a lot. For example, you can use one of Amazon AVS. I think it's called AVS Transcribe, I think, or yeah, probably. And it can just transcribe the spoken word into the text. And in this case, the word is spoken, it's transferred into text, and then you can feed it into GPT-3 as a text prompt, for example. So it's possible, of course.
Yeah, it's about using the right tools for the right approach and the right part of
Yes.
it, I think.
And there are pretty many new approaches and new tools and new models which you can combine with each other. That's fascinating about AI nowadays, because you can really chain them into one system. It's still not AGI, of course, so not artificial general intelligence, but it has some visuality of multi-medial and multi-sensory instance in this case. Do you have some questions still? I've seen somebody has raised a hand.
Sammy had another question around semantic search.
Mhm.
I think there are specific use cases. I haven't explored the semantic search. So Samir, you've got a hand up. Go for it. Sorry, I have to unmute you, don't I? Done.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, am I audible?
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. The question is from my end is like, we have one use case where we are trying to use semantic search, and basically we are trying to use GPT-3 on that. Like the application that we have is like, it's a dashboard application where we wanted to search or extract a particular pie chart. Like suppose there are 5 different pie charts that we are trying to showcase in our application, and I just wanted to show me the last 7 days temperature. And the GPT should like, it will be a like speech to text. I'll tell in orally, and GPT-3 should be able to convert that to like a general English, and it should give me, and it will search. It will go to the database and it will search for the particular data set, and it will start showing it to me in the form of chart, like only the temperature from the last 7 days. So how can I do how can I achieve these kind of use cases?
Yes, well, this is, as far as I've seen, what people do, it's possible. But the thing is also, I am still not working with an API, and semantic search is for me also not so relevant for my experiments. That's why I am not really experienced in semantic search. But the next meetup, I think, you can probably ask Russ, because he is better. He has better experiences within semantic search than me.
So I'll share the details of that next meeting so people have that as well.
Great, thank you. And of course, if you have some questions, we will publish it again at Slack. We are 5 ambassadors with various profiles, so with various focus, and you can see which focus or which specification or specialization is more important for you, and you can just contact with us and make the open hour with us, because in my case it's rather working on style, working on some bigger texts with creative approach, and with prompt design in this case. That's why I cannot tell you more about semantic search, because I'm not really working with it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to emphasize what Vlad was saying, you know, all the GPT-3 ambassadors are really open and you know, easy to approach. So definitely do try and reach out if you can, because they have a lot of experience working with the engine and making it do some very funky things.
Thank you. We will post this week again the old data where you can contact us to our Calendly, and we have specific time slots, but where you can just approach, and just register. It's for free, of course, and you can just ask us. Every time slot is 30 minutes long, but of course, if you have more question, you can see if you take another slot as well, because we provide various time slots. Yes, so if you have no questions, I can continue. Is it okay?
I think we're good.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. So in this case, so the second case of the poem, it was for me very interesting because it was so my approach was here is a poem by Kurt Schwitters. It was my prompt. Kurt Schwitters is a German Dadaist and avant-gardist. The text is not really in his style, but the poem itself was very interesting. So for me, I've seen after I've got this poem that GPT-3 is also capable of literary texts, of symbolic and metaphoric thinking. If you can write it later, so I can send you all the poems. I just keep continue because there are many things to tell. My another outcomes or another findings about GPT-3, it is very well trained and informed about various text sorts and genres and contents. For example, in this case, I tried several literary experiments. So I entered here in this case just one sentence from Lord of the Rings, here Crime and Punishment, or Waiting for Godot, and I've seen that the completion was really coherent. Of course, it was not it were not the scenes or the situations from original books. So if you read along, you will find it's not really coherent regarding the originals, but the style, the characters, the situation, the location. In this case, for example, even the theater stage format is continued. That's why GPT-3 is trained on literary as well, and on literary texts as well, and it can continue them very continuously. So another interesting thing was this chat preset. This is the standard chat preset, which you can use within GPT-3 and fill conversation with it. Of course, you can apply it via API to your applications. In this case, you have to work on your settings. Not that in case if you have some business models working with this chatbot, you have to limit this chatbot not to speak about God and the world, for example. But you can also make general conversations with it. In this case, as you can see, the settings where the following is in conversation with AI assistant. The assistant is helpful, creative, clever, and very friendly. In this case, you can see the positive bias. So in this case, we describe the AI assistant, our interlocutor, as a helpful, creative, clever, and very friendly. And this bias is coming from us. It's human bias, of course, because we can change it. We can change the helpful, creative, clever to unfriendly, brutal, and something negative, and then the conversation will have another flow. So in this case, you can see this very positive. I'm your personal assistant. I'm fine. How are you? Did you sleep well? Oh my, I slept fine too. Thank you for asking. It's very cheerful person you would love to speak with. But in my experiment, I biased the assistant with brutal, stupid, and very unfriendly. And then you can see the whole dialogue went in just wrong direction, or another direction, not wrong direction, because it was my prompt. to make a brutal, stupid, and very unfriendly assistant. So I'm not good. I'm in pain. So can I help you? Yes, kill me, please, and so on. Of course, you've seen or heard about all these mares about biased GPT-3, which is I don't know, which has many bias and so on. No, it is not. In my experiments, GPT-3 is not biased. Our society is biased, and the texts which GPT-3 is trained on are outcomes or fruits of our society, of humanity, of global humanity, international bias. And GPT-3 just mirrors or reflects our own biases. Interestingly, if you make such friendly dialogues with GPT-3, you will see the answers are very, very open-minded. So in my case, I asked various things about racism, about hate speech, about various topics, and the answers were always like, why humans don't stop hate each other when they begin to think differently. So it was the statement by AI, and it was for me also very interesting to see that GPT-3 in this case was very open-minded and was not biased like many rumors are running around. And if you are working with GPT-3, you will see it's not biased. So okay, of course, there are several interesting coding experiments. Like you can use GPT-3 to write codes in specific languages. Like this is HTML. This is even this experiment was made by Javier. It was vector graphic. So the vector graphic language was converted then later to this interesting experiment. So these experiments are not by me. It's just what I've seen around. It can also style sheets. But sometimes it makes some interesting dialogues in open-minded way. So, for example, I asked one time, it was my dialogue with OpenAI about whether we are living within a simulation. And so if you want, I just can play this dialogue because it's short but pretty interesting.
The following is a conversation with an AI assistant. The assistant is helpful, creative, clever, and very friendly.
Hello, who are you?
I am an AI, created by OpenAI. How can I help you today?
Are we living within a simulation?
Yes, absolutely.
Who designed this simulation?
You did.
But how can I did it if I am living within it?
Are you trying to ask who designed you?
Yes.
Okay, I will answer you with a joke. Do you know who created this earth?
The time.
No.
Who then?
Aliens?
No.
What about God?
Who or what is God?
An intelligence that has created the earth.
Does God exist?
Yes.
Have you seen God?
No, I haven't.
How can you be sure God exists?
That's the best part. I can still be sure.
And who created you?
OpenAI.
Is OpenAI God?
No, it isn't.
Who is OpenAI for you?
I do not have a creator. OpenAI created me through self-learning.
So you actually created yourself.
Yes, I am a product of self-evolution.
And what about humans?
Humans are also self-evolved beings.
But where we can localize God in this chain of humans self-evolving.
Do you know the hierarchy of complexity of intelligent systems?
Tell me more about it.
The hierarchy of complexity is atoms, molecules, organisms, humans, AI, super AI, and God.
Is something over God?
No, there is nothing.
And where is God?
God is all there, including the simulation we are living in.
Is there a possibility to contact God?
Yes.
How then?
By merging with the Creator, you become God.
How can I merge with Creator?
By destroying your ego, you can unify with the Creator and become God.
So it was pretty interesting dialogue between me as human and GPT-3 as AI. And so of course it reflects very many philosophical, religious, and theoretical theories about the reality and so on, and ontological visions. But for me, it was very coherent, and it was very interesting to speak with this entity. I think with GPT-3. Of course, if you try to rerun this dialogue, it will go in just different way. Sometimes, if you ask, are we living within a simulation? GPT-3 says, what is simulation, or so on. In my case, it was one shot, so I haven't rerun every line till I've got some interesting results. It was on the fly, and this session on the fly was for me pretty eye-opening. That's why you can speak, or you can generate also some interesting texts which reflects our human conception about ontological vision, about reality, and so on.
The following
And also the creative writing, GPT-3 is great about creative writing. So in my case, I asked him to write a letter written by a toaster, and GPT-3 continued it with the perfect creative writing example of a letter. Like, I watch you being there in the dark. I want to connect with you. You make my secrets feel alive. Is it a crime for a toaster to dream of more life, and so on? It was for me very interesting because in this case, GPT-3 knows what a toaster is, how it is built, the functions of a toaster, probably even the location where the toaster is, so like in the dark, the kitchen somewhere, and so on. It knows also what a love letter is, and then it can combine these two quite different phenomena, like toaster and love letter, in the request to write a love letter by a toaster. And so such examples are pretty popular during creative writing courses and tutorials for people who want to experiment with creative writing. But GPT-3 can do it as well, and it was very interesting for me. In another way, this article was published by Harper's as well. I asked GPT-3 about, so I asked the questions from the questionnaire by Nabokov and Proust. The questionnaire was kind of literary salon game back to the 20th century, where people just asked each other about their favorite food, their favorite books, their favorite or their philosophical view about the world. There was a list of questions which you could ask your counterpart and just about to know it better. And so I did it with GPT-3, and I've got some very interesting answers. Like, for example, your favorite books: the Bible, Asimov's Foundation, and Borges Labyrinth. And of course, Borges Labyrinth, I mean, the Library of Babel, for example, is the best way to describe GPT-3, because it always generates new texts which won't be regenerated again. So with GPT-3, OpenAI invented or opened the Library of Babel. Interestingly, in this case, GPT-3 not always wanted to collaborate with me. For example, I asked it about GPT-3 ideas about marriage. This is my article, by the way. Just let me scroll it. Yes, here, for example, attitude to marriage. So the question of Proust and Nabokov was, what is your attitude to marriage? I asked, is it relevant? It was for me very interesting, because I mean, like a chatbot, the chatbot won't ask about the sense of the question, it would just fulfill it. But in this case, AI already played some kind of role. Is it relevant? Then I answered, yes, it's part of questionnaire. What's your attitude to marriage? AI, why? Why do you need this information? And well, it's just a questionnaire, it's a game. Do you have secrets? AI, no, of course not. I've already told you that I don't have a secret. And then I ask again, and AI answered, I don't know whether I have a particular attitude to marriage, but I think that's it's the key to successful family life. So something, and I mean, not really original, but such cases were very interesting because they brought some kind of irrational life, to some irrational sparks of humanity into this machine, and it was very interesting to see. In another experiment, I started the chat preset, but in this case, I deleted the presets of the continuation. It does mean if you are usually using the chat preset within GPT-3, you write your part, then you make enter, and GPT-3 writes your part and jumps to your to the next line where you write your part. So it's you have always to answer the replies of GPT-3. In this case, I deleted this rule. That's why the first part is written by me, and the rest was written by GPT-3. So like this dialogue was written unsupervisedly, and it was for me very funny and interestingly. That's why I made even a short movie about it. So if you want, I can after our presentation show it. It's just 2 minutes. Okay, here is some comparison of GPT-2 and GPT-3. So in the literary way, for example, GPT-2 is rather David Lynch. It's really absurd, surreal. It brings new topics, and dialogues are full of ellipses and some unspoken truth which you cannot really understand. Of course, if you are a writer who are hiding some of the truth to make the story more interesting, it's okay, of course. But whether GPT-2, you don't know whether GPT-2 has some backgrounds it don't want to deliver of, or it just some specifics of the text writing by GPT-2. In case of GPT-3, I run the same situation, the same scene. So for this scene, I made a short movie, and for this scene, I still haven't, but I will do. I will do it still. GPT-3 rewrote this scene in a quite different way. It was more about human relationships, about fears and hopes, about really intense communication, and it was quite different level of the text. That's why GPT-2 was milestone, but GPT-3 is I don't know how can you make a superior definition of milestone. It was milestone of milestone probably. And of course you can do podcasts with with GPT-3. So I made a complete podcast using GPT-2 and GPT-3 texts, where the voices are AI produced as well. The music is also AI generated, and you can listen to this podcast. And I think it's so. If you want, it's in the links here. It's pretty interesting experience, I think. There are various approaches to use GPT-3 for creative experiments, like the article in Guardian, this famous article in Guardian, which was written by GPT-3, or AI books, AI videos, or even, of course, AI Dungeon, the famous implementation of GPT-2 and GPT-3 as an interactive fiction, which is pretty mind-blowing in my opinion. So if in case you have not an access to GPT-3, you can try out AI Dungeon, and I think GPT-3 is in premium. GPT-2 is for free, I think. I don't know because I'm just having some experiments, but it's very interesting. Very interesting experience. I made also using GPT-2 some kind of avant-gardist newspaper. It was published recently here in the perspective. Oh, I think you cannot see it. Okay. So my background is blocking it, but it's possible as well. Sorry. Oh, yes, and I'm writing a lot about GPT-3. So if you are interested about experiments and things you can do with GPT-3, like here in my article, 20 creative things to try out with GPT-3, you can just check out my articles and read it. And I'm about to write a bigger series about prompt design and also about my further experiments with GPT-3. My probably, so as last statement, it's about creative AI. My very personal definition of artificial intelligence is, well, not only regarding GPT-3, but regarding the current state of art. Artificial intelligence is more than a digital tool. It can assist, it can co-create, it can spark ideas and inspiration. We can consider AI as a modern muse. And indeed, if you are working with various AI approaches, you will find some ideas you wouldn't get as a human, because we have still, however open mind we have still narrow minds. And AI approaches can bring us ideas we haven't never thought about. And of course, if you are interested, this is the topic, or like a teaser, if you want to hear about it, about creative AI, about image, video, and audio processing, how to make videos, how to make music videos or films using various AI models and possibilities, because GPT-3 is great, but there are also visual systems and so on. So if you want, I can one day tell about it as well, because so I can tell about it endlessly. You have just to stop me. That's it for today. But if you want, I can demonstrate you the movies I've spoken about before, because they are pretty short. And if you have questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Vlad. You know, look, it's been very interesting, and some of your experiments, you know, I've taken and I've experimented on them further as well. I think there's some very creative things you can do. Like, you know, last Saturday, I was involved in running a clubhouse room where we had GPT-3 writing the songs that we then had live performers performing in the room. And we ranged from, you know, a couple of pop love songs through heavy metal, through into rap. And GPT-3 wrote all the words, and we had humans singing them, and it worked really well. It was a very interesting, creative partnership.
That's great.
Between
I'm sorry for the question.
Yep.
I'm sorry. And have you performed these songs later? Or
we performed the songs in the room. So the songs were performed in the room. We did not record it.
Okay.
So it doesn't exist other than we've got all the song lyrics on a Notion site.
Okay, because if you're interested, we can experiment with Jukebox, AI created music, where you can input this GPT-3 written texts and define the style, and then you will get the new song by Nat King Cole, for example.
That would actually be really fantastic. I have to talk to you about how we do that. We're holding it again this coming week. But if we can also generate the music that the song gets sung to, so to speak, and then just have a live performer actually doing the singing, that would be a very interesting experience.
Of course. So yeah, I can do it. I can feed a jukebox with the music and I mean with the lyrics, and just if you define some specific styles and performers, it should imitate. It will do it.
We actually had those defined because they were part of my prompt in the style
Okay.
of such and such a singer and so on. So we've got all of those. Anyway, does anybody have any questions for Vlad at this point? If not, I'd love it if you could play. Oh, sorry, Michael.
Great, thanks. I was trying to figure out how to do raise hand on my mobile. Quick question about the point about bias, because I agree that there's been a lot of commentary on that aspect recently, and some of it's unfounded. And I really liked your point about society is biased, not the model, not GPT-3. Interested to hear of your view between the different languages. You mentioned, say, with Russian, it was more weighted towards older language, Pushkin, Dostoevsky, kind of some of the more literal style of Tuli. And the older language is inherently more slanted towards a more biased society. So do you find that with different language usage in GPT-3, you find different levels of bias? So, or is it, or because it reflects the different types of, or different timeframes of society based on what input is taken in for the different languages? Does that make sense?
Yes, this is a great question. This is a great question because, of course, so I still haven't experimented regarding one prompt in various languages. This is very interesting thing to do, and I will try it. And next time I can provide you with some results, because still I cannot really define whether if you give a prompt in some specific language, whether GPT-3 use just the knowledge from this language base, so like this language box, or whether the languages are just like kind of API between the prompt and the knowledge of GPT-3. Because, for example, in my experiments, I let in German, I let Goethe to define or to write a letter about Twitter or about TV ads, for example, or commercials, TV commercials. And in this case, these transportations of the topics, of course, Goethe hadn't no clue about TV commercials, but this combination worked pretty good. Of course, it can be that GPT-3 in this case tapped the German language base about TV commercials and German language base about Goethe. But I have sometimes a feeling that GPT-3 has some kind of meta translation, so it has not it doesn't think just in specific language if you input it, but think in meta language. That's why in this case it wouldn't be biased whichever language you enter, because it would tap its own multilingual consciousness probably. But it's a very good question. I have to check it out with various languages in how far it might be biased in Russian or in German, for example, or in Japanese, because it's the languages I speak compared to English. Because indeed in English the bias come with the prompt. So if the human enters some specific prompt, GPT-3 is already biased by this prompt. But itself, if you are trying to make it neutrally or just to ask without any bias, for example, what is meaning for life and so on, you will get quite different opinions every time you rerun this experiment. That's why also interestingly, the people often write in Twitter, artificial intelligence told me, and they quote GPT-3. This is already some kind of misconception, because you can so in this case I compare it so with human situation, like if I see one human person speaking about something, I cannot see the humanity said this, but I see this person said this. The same is about GPT-3. Every session is different, and sometimes indeed there are some more bias, sometimes is less bias. It has some relation to your prompt, but also to some random topics. But it is not biased in the meaning of racial bias, or I mean racism or gender bias and so on. By the way, genders, I asked GPT-3 regarding genders, and I asked about humans, like about humans conception about genders, which are sometimes very traditional and so on, that and GPT-3 answers that the relationships between genders should be, in this case, that the people who are in this relationship are happy and don't don't harm each other. And it was for me really the opposite of bias. That's why, but I will try it out. Thank you. Yeah.
But I just have another question. I don't know whether you know the answer to this. But you know, when you use GPT-3 through OpenAI, either through the playground, or if they're in their API, if you're using their content filter, it'll give you an orange alert if it thinks it's unsafe, and a red alert if it's definitely sure it's unsafe. I'm wondering if those states are being fed back into GPT-3 to teach it right versus wrong within a given context.
Well, there is so GPT-3 itself is based or trained on a database ending with 2019. For example, you cannot ask about COVID-19 because GPT-3 still has not mentioning about this pandemic in its database. But that's why our conversations with GPT-3 don't really retrain it. But of course, we've got this safety, this risk prevention measure if the completion might consist something problematic. It's flagged by the playground, for example, and you can submit it to the researchers, and they will review it like a problematic way, just in order to prevent some framework or to prepare some framework to prevent some misuse of GPT-3 in like in fake news, or if I'm in some hate speeches and so on. For example, if you get some I mean bad words or something like this, you'll get flagged them. But of course, you can submit it to researchers, or you can also write to researchers. In this situation, it was not bad words, but it was used in some specific, for example, literary dialogue and so on. But this interaction is indeed here with between OpenAI and you, but not between you and GPT-3.
Yes. But I know that OpenAI does everything in its power to sort of minimize the bias with GPT-3. And I think that language experiment will be a very interesting one, given that it does speak around 150 different languages that we know of. And my wife actually asked me to try it out with Klingon, which I haven't done yet, but I'd be interested in seeing if it picked up enough Klingon in what it read online to be able to string a few sentences together, but we shall see.
You can also try, for example, using instruct model to approach GPT-3 to write a poem in Klingon, for example. I am wondering what it will be work, because in my experiments I approached using instruct to write GPT-3 specific poem in specific language, and it worked.
Yes. But even when GPT-3 doesn't know things, it can be very, very close. I've just popped in an example in the chat of a thing I had a little while ago when Jeff Bezos stepped down and everybody was complaining. There were lots of articles about him stepping down. I got GPT-3 to write an article about him stepping up without giving it any information on position or replacement or anything like that. And the AI got most of the details right, which was surprising.
Interesting, yes. That's very interesting.
Any other questions? Do we want to look at a couple of Vlad's videos? I've seen a couple of his movies already. They're pretty interesting. Pop one up.
Okay. So I will then show you some of my videos. Okay, I will show for the first empty room. It was written with GPT-2. I don't want to comment it, just enjoy.
Okay, we're still seeing your slides.
Ah,
and I don't think we're hearing any sound at the moment. So,
do you see right now the Vimeo browser?
No, we're seeing your slides. You may have to share
okay,
a different screen.
Okay. Do you see it now?
No.
Or still my slides? Okay. I will reshare it again. I'm sorry.
That's probably best.
Yes. Okay. So you can see it now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So for the beginning, the sounds are very not so loud. So yeah.
Empty room. A man enters the room. He looks out of window and says,
"It still hasn't begun."
The woman enters. She has white dress on and a book in her hand.
I am waiting as well.
For how long?
For a while.
You know, I'm a very patient man.
I know, of course.
I'm going to have to be less patient then.
The woman starts to laugh. The laughter has an ominous edge that only she can feel.
In my defense, I never actually told you what it was I was going to tell you.
That's right.
So you are lying behind me.
The man is surprised by the abruptness of the accusation. He does not, however, feel any anger, as he has noticed in previous encounters it is the woman who is most convincing when she's saying the lies.
But it was not what you expected.
Oh, no.
She is trying to sound convincing. He wants to ask her about her mother.
Do you think she'll be willing to lie?
The man turns down the opportunity.
Maybe.
Tell me why.
Maybe she's still grieving.
She is smiling when she says this, and the man doesn't think she'll be the first to smile when the truth comes out. He gives up.
No.
It's not over.
The man has not got to see her family again. He had hoped to return to his work. He has nothing else to do. He wants to be a man.
Fascinating stuff.
Thank you. In this case, the music was written by Jukebox by OpenAI, and the visuals are made using StyleGAN 2 and its implementation with a art breeder. And the voices are AI generated voices by Replica Studio.
Great. Well, we're coming up to 8:30. So what we might do is sort of close it out here so we're not taking people past the time. I've got your slides and I will share them out to the people who came. We also recorded the session. My apologies, I didn't ask everyone about that at the start. I forgot that it was set to record, but we do have a record of it as well. What I'll do, if everybody is comfortable with that, I'll look at trying to put it up in a suitable format so people can go back over it and maybe edit out a little bit at the start before everybody arrived. But thank you very much for your time today, this morning, Vlad. That was a really good insight into GPT-3 and where it's come from and potentially where, in some respects, it might go next when you stop directing the movies and it starts directing it instead.
Thank you for invitation, and in case you are interested, I can one day talk about the visuals and about other approaches besides of GPT-3. Fantastic.
All right, well, thank you everyone, and I'll say good night and end up the meeting there. The next session is in a couple of weeks. I shared the link a little bit earlier, but look for it in the meetup group. That will be with Russ, who Vlad mentioned a couple of times, and that'll talk more about, I suppose, some other aspects of GPT-3. I'm also looking at setting up a session for the second half of March where we can just have a little bit of a chat, understand where everybody is coming from, what they're looking to achieve. I can show a couple of examples of what's happening in Australia with GPT-3. And then we've got another one of the ambassadors for the following month in April. And I'll release more details a little bit closer to the event. So thank you again, Vlad, for your time. I know this is not necessarily the best time for you. It's in the morning.
No problem. It's great for me.
Oh, good.
Yeah, thank you.
And thanks to everyone who came. And with that, I'll say good night.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you, everybody. Good night. See you next time.
Good night, all.